Jake Mitchell floated through the medical bay of the Pathfinder, checking supplies for what felt like the 100th time that week. Space exploration sounded exciting when he signed up 3 years ago, but most days involved routine checks and endless paperwork. He was 28 years old, trained as both a combat medic and field specialist, yet he spent more time counting bandages than using them. The ship hummed quietly around him as it drifted through uncharted space. They were humanity's furthest reach into the unknown, a small exploration vessel mapping new systems and searching for signs of intelligent life. So far they had found plenty of rocks, ice, and more rocks. Jake sometimes wondered if humans were truly alone in the universe. The alarm shattered his thoughts. Red lights flashed across every surface as the ship's computer announced an emergency. Jake grabbed the nearest support rail as the vessel lurched sideways. His captain's voice crackled over the intercom, sharp and urgent. "All hands to stations. We have an unknown contact." "Repeat, unknown contact detected." Jake's heart hammered as he pushed himself toward the bridge. This was it. This was what they had been searching for. The corridors blurred past him as he moved through the ship with practiced ease. When he reached the bridge, Captain Helen Morris stood at the main console, her face pale in the red emergency lighting. "What do we have?" Jake asked, strapping himself into a seat. "Debris field ahead," Helen said, her fingers dancing across the controls. "And something else. A small vessel, heavily damaged. It's sending out a distress signal." Jake leaned forward, studying the screen. The signal pattern was unlike anything in Earth's databases. It pulsed with a strange rhythm, almost musical in its complexity. "That's not human," he whispered. "No," Helen agreed. "It's not." The bridge crew exchanged glances. First contact protocols were clear. Observe from a distance, gather data, report back to Earth, and wait for instructions. But the distress signal continued its desperate cry, and Jake saw Helen's jaw tighten with the weight of decision. "That signal is weakening," Jake pointed out. "Whatever is in there might not have much time." "We have orders," Lieutenant Marcus Webb said from the weapons console. "We're supposed to maintain distance from unknown contacts." "Orders written before we knew aliens existed," Helen shot back. She turned to Jake. "If we retrieve that pod, can you handle unknown biology?" Jake thought about his training. All those years studying medicine and emergency response. He had never treated an alien before, but the principles remained the same. Stop the bleeding. Maintain airways, stabilize the patient. "I can try," he said. Helen nodded once, her decision made. "Bring it in." The next 30 minutes passed in tense silence as they maneuvered the Pathfinder closer to the damaged pod. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. All smooth curves and crystalline surfaces that seemed to shift colors in the light. Whoever built it possessed technology far beyond Earth's capabilities. The pod was barely 10 feet long, designed for a single occupant. When they finally secured it in the cargo bay and pressurized the area, Jake suited up in full hazard gear. His hands trembled slightly as he checked his medical kit. This was it, humanity's first contact with alien life, and he was about to be on the front line. The pod's exterior was scorched and cracked. As Jake approached with cutting tools, he noticed strange symbols etched into the surface. They glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the distress signal. Helen and Marcus watched from behind the observation window. Weapons ready in case things went wrong. Jake cut through the pod's seal and it hissed open, releasing a cloud of vapor that his suit's sensors immediately began analyzing. Inside, curled in a protective alcove, was the most beautiful and terrifying thing he had ever seen. She was humanoid, but clearly not human. Her skin held a slight blue tint and seemed to shimmer with an inner light. 4 fingers on each hand, elegant and long. Her face was angular with large eyes that remained closed. She wore armor that had been breached in several places, and dark purple blood seeped from multiple wounds. Her chest barely moved with shallow breaths. "She's alive," Jake reported, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Barely, she's losing blood fast." "Can you help her?" Helen asked through the comm. Jake studied the alien's wounds. Despite the differences in appearance, the basics seemed similar. She had a circulatory system that was failing, damaged organs that needed support, and she was going into shock. "I'm going to try." He worked quickly, using every piece of knowledge he possessed. Her blood was different, but it still needed to stay inside her body. He applied pressure to the worst wounds, used synthetic sealants to close the breaches in her armor and skin beneath. Her breathing was wrong, but he managed to insert a tube to help move air through her system. She was cold, so he wrapped her in thermal blankets. Throughout it all, Jake talked to her softly, though she couldn't hear him. "Hang on," he murmured. "I've got you. You're going to be okay. Just hang on." 2 hours later, she stabilized. Jake sat back, exhausted and covered in purple blood, but she was breathing easier. Her color had improved slightly. She might actually survive. That was when the Pathfinder's alarm screamed again. Jake looked up at the observation window where Helen's face had gone white. "What is it?" "Company," she said grimly. "Big company." Jake left the medical bay and rushed to the bridge. On the main screen, a massive vessel had appeared. It dwarfed the Pathfinder like a whale next to a minnow. The ship was magnificent and terrifying, covered in the same crystalline material as the pod, with weapons arrays that could vaporize their small vessel with a single shot. "They're scanning us," Marcus reported, his voice tight. "They're powering weapons. Open all channels," Helen ordered. "Broadcast on every frequency. Tell them we mean no harm. Tell them we rescued a survivor from the pod." The communications officer worked frantically, but there was no response from the alien ship. Its weapons continued to charge, energy readings climbing into ranges that would tear the Pathfinder apart. Jake made a split-second decision. He ran back to the cargo bay, to the medical area where the alien woman lay unconscious. He positioned himself between her and the door, spreading his arms wide. If they could see inside the ship, they needed to see him protecting her, not threatening her. "Jake, what are you doing?" Helen's voice crackled in his ear. "Showing them we're not the enemy," he replied. The alien vessel's weapons reached full charge. Jake held his breath, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. Then, just as he was certain they were about to die, the energy readings dropped. The weapons powered down. A new signal came through, this time directed at the Pathfinder. The communications officer worked to decode it, and after a moment, images appeared on the screens throughout the ship. Aliens similar to the woman Jake had saved, their faces stern and clearly military. One of them, larger than the others with elaborate markings on her armor, spoke in a language that sounded like music and thunder combined. The Pathfinder's computer worked to translate, pulling patterns from the transmission and the pod's database. After several attempts, broken words began to form. "You have our princess return now, princess." Jake looked down at the woman he had saved. She was royalty. He had just performed emergency field medicine on an alien princess, and her people had nearly destroyed his ship for it. "Tell them she's injured but stable," Helen ordered. "Tell them we're bringing her out now." The next hour was tense as they prepared to transfer the princess. Jake insisted on accompanying her, staying in his hazard suit and maintaining her medical support systems. When the airlock connected to the alien vessel, he carefully guided her floating form through. The interior of the alien ship was incredible. Everything seemed to be made of living crystal that pulsed with soft light. Alien soldiers in elaborate armor surrounded him immediately, weapons raised, but they didn't fire. They looked at their princess, then at Jake, then at each other with what might have been confusion. An older alien woman approached, her armor more ornate than the others, her bearing suggesting high rank. She studied the princess, then Jake, her large eyes unreadable. She spoke, and this time the translation came faster. "Human, you did this?" Jake nodded, keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. "I'm a medic." She was dying. "I couldn't just leave her." The alien woman reached out and touched the princess's face gently, then looked at Jake with what might have been respect. "You saved our princess, our heir, our light." Before Jake could respond, the princess stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening as she took in her surroundings. She saw the older woman and spoke in their musical language. Then her gaze fell on Jake. She spoke again, gesturing weakly at him. The older woman's eyes widened. She barked orders, and suddenly the weapons were lowered. The soldiers stepped back, some of them actually bowing. "The princess says you are her savior," the older woman translated. "She says you fought death itself to bring her back. She says you spoke to her, kept her spirit anchored while you healed her body." Jake blinked in surprise. She had been unconscious the entire time. How had she known he spoke to her? The princess tried to sit up, and Jake immediately moved to support her, checking her vitals even though he had no idea what normal was for her. The journey to the Velkara homeworld took 3 weeks, even with their advanced ships. Jake spent most of that time studying everything he could about their culture, language, and customs. The Velkara provided extensive databases, and he absorbed information like a sponge. knowing that one wrong move could create an intergalactic incident. Earth's government had responded with predictable chaos. Some officials celebrated the contact, others feared it, and everyone had opinions about how Jake should behave. They sent him hundreds of pages of diplomatic guidelines, cultural sensitivity training, and political strategies. Jake read them all but trusted his instincts more than any manual. Princess Liara recovered quickly during the journey. She visited him often on the transport ship, teaching him their language and explaining the complexities of Velkara society. She was patient with his mistakes and seemed genuinely interested in human culture. Jake found himself looking forward to their daily lessons. "Your people are so young," she said one day as they sat in an observation room, watching the stars streak past. "We have been traveling the stars for 10,000 of your years. Yet you reached out to save me without hesitation. Why?" Jake considered the question carefully. "Because it was the right thing to do. You were hurt and needed help. Nothing else mattered." Liara studied him with those large, luminous eyes. "Among my people, such decisions are weighted with politics, honor codes, and potential consequences. You simply acted from compassion. It is refreshing and terrifying in equal measure." "Terrifying?" Jake asked. "Because compassion can be exploited," she replied softly, "and because my mother will see in you something she has been searching for." Before Jake could ask what she meant, the ship's announcement system declared their imminent arrival. He pressed his face to the viewport and gasped. The Velkara homeworld hung before them like a jewel, its surface covered in crystalline structures that caught the light of their sun and scattered it in rainbow patterns. Cities sprawled across continents connected by threads of light that pulsed with energy. "Welcome to Velkara Prime," Liara said with obvious pride. "The heart of our empire." The landing was a spectacle. Thousands of Velkara had gathered at the royal spaceport, all wanting to see the human who saved their princess. Jake descended the ramp in his dress uniform, feeling incredibly small and out of place. The crowd's reaction was overwhelming, a sound that might have been cheering or perhaps their form of applause. Captain Helen Morris had accompanied him as Earth's official representative, along with a small security team. They all looked as overwhelmed as Jake felt. The Velkara were breathtaking, their crystalline architecture rising hundreds of feet into the air, their clothing flowing and elegant, their bearing proud and ancient. Commander Kilara met them at the base of the ramp, her armor polished to a mirror shine. "The Queen awaits you in the palace," she said formally. "Please follow me." The journey through the city was surreal. They traveled in a vehicle that seemed to float on beams of light, gliding silently through streets filled with curious Velkara. Everyone stopped to watch the humans pass. Some bowed, others simply stared, and Jake felt the weight of representing his entire species. The royal palace dominated the city center, a massive structure that seemed to grow out of the planet itself. Its towers reached toward the sky, each one pulsing with soft light. Gardens surrounded it, filled with plants that moved and swayed even though there was no wind. Everything was beautiful and alien, and Jake felt more out of his depth with each passing moment. Inside, the palace was even more impressive. Corridors stretched in impossible directions. Rooms seemed larger inside than outside. And everywhere Jake looked, he saw art and technology blended into something that transcended both. Velkara moved through the halls with purpose, all of them female, all of them radiating an aura of authority and power. "Your society is matriarchal," Jake observed quietly to Liara, who walked beside him. "Yes," she confirmed. "Females hold all positions of leadership, military command, and political power. Males exist but serve different roles in our society. You will find our way of life quite different from your own." Jake thought about Earth's long struggle with gender equality and wondered what these powerful women would think of human history. Probably not much, he decided. They entered the throne room and Jake's breath caught. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows high above. The walls seemed to be made of living crystal that shifted colors slowly, creating an ever-changing display of light. At the far end, raised on a dais, sat Queen Cirith. She was magnificent. Taller than the other Velkara, her armor was ornate gold and crystal, her bearing absolutely regal. Her eyes, larger and more luminous than Liara's, fixed on Jake with an intensity that made him want to look away. But he didn't. He met her gaze and walked forward, Helen and his team following at a respectful distance. They stopped at the appropriate distance, and Jake bowed as he had been taught. Your Majesty, I am honored to stand before you. Rise, Jake Mitchell of Earth. Queen Sirith's voice filled the chamber, resonant and commanding. You stand in this hall not as a supplicant, but as an honored guest. You saved my daughter's life, and for that the entire Velkara Empire is in your debt. Jake straightened, unsure how to respond. The Queen continued, I have studied your people since our first contact. Humans are young, impulsive, violent, and compassionate in equal measure. You wage war upon yourselves even as you reach for the stars. You are divided by trivial differences yet capable of great unity. You are a paradox. We're working on it, Jake said, then immediately worried that was too casual. But Queen Sirith smiled, an expression that transformed her face from regal to almost warm. I appreciate honesty. Too many in this court speak only what they think I wish to hear. Tell me, Jake Mitchell, when you found my daughter dying in that pod, what went through your mind? Jake thought back to that moment, the fear and determination. I thought that someone was hurt and needed help. I thought about how I could save her life. Everything else was just noise. Everything else, the Queen repeated thoughtfully, including the fact that she was an alien, that helping her might endanger your ship, that you had no idea if you would succeed or even if her people would be grateful or hostile. Yes, Your Majesty. None of that seemed to matter. The Queen leaned forward slightly, her gaze intense. This is what makes humans interesting. You are capable of acting without overthinking, of choosing compassion over calculation. It is a rare quality among the spacefaring races we have encountered. She stood, and the entire court seemed to hold its breath. She descended the steps of her dais and walked directly to Jake. Up close, she was even more intimidating, towering over him by nearly a foot. She studied him carefully, and Jake felt like she was seeing straight through him. I am going to offer you something, Jake Mitchell, she said quietly, though her voice still carried through the chamber, and I want you to understand that it is both a great honor and a great burden. Jake's mouth went dry. I'm listening, Your Majesty. By our laws and customs, you have earned a life debt from the royal family. Such debts are sacred and cannot be ignored. They can only be repaid in one of three ways: through service, through sacrifice, or through binding. Binding? Jake asked. Queen Sirith nodded. You would become part of the royal household, sworn to our service, granted all the privileges and responsibilities that entails. You would be under our protection, our authority, and our care. You would, in essence, become ours. The throne room erupted in whispers. Jake heard Captain Helen's sharp intake of breath behind him. He looked at Liara, who watched him with an expression he couldn't read. Then he looked back at the Queen. What exactly would that mean? He asked carefully. It would mean you could never return to Earth permanently. The Queen said bluntly, you would live here among us, learning our ways and serving our interests. You would be given rank and status beyond what most Velkara achieve in lifetimes. You would also be bound by our laws, our customs, and my authority as Queen. And if I refuse? Jake asked. The Queen's expression didn't change. Then the debt remains unpaid, a source of dishonor to my house. Relations between our peoples would begin under a shadow of obligation unfulfilled. I would accept your refusal, but it would pain me. Jake felt the weight of the decision crushing down on him. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about Earth's first contact with an advanced alien civilization. His choice could shape the relationship between their species for generations. May I have time to consider? He asked. Of course, Queen Sirith said. You will be given quarters in the palace. Stay as long as you need. Learn about us, explore our world, and make your decision with full knowledge of what it means. Over the following weeks, Jake did exactly that. He explored the palace and the city beyond, always accompanied by guards who were polite but vigilant. He studied Velkara history, culture, and politics. He learned about their wars, their art, their philosophy. The more he learned, the more complex his decision became. Liara spent considerable time with him, showing him the best of her world. They walked through gardens where plants sang in harmonic patterns. They visited museums containing artifacts from civilizations. The preparations for the binding ceremony consumed the palace for days. Jake watched with fascination and growing nervousness as chambers were decorated, rituals were planned, and hundreds of important Velkara arrived from across the empire. He was fitted for ceremonial armor that felt impossibly light yet stronger than anything Earth could produce. Teachers drilled him on proper protocols until his head spun with instructions. Throughout it all, he noticed something troubling. Not everyone was happy about the binding. Some of the noble houses whispered when he passed. Guards exchanged meaningful glances. During state dinners, certain dignitaries would speak in their own language rather than using the translation devices, clearly not wanting him to understand their words. "You are becoming a political statement," Commander Kylara explained one afternoon during combat training. She had insisted on teaching him Velkara fighting techniques, claiming that anyone bound to the royal family needed to know how to defend themselves. "Some see you as a bridge to a new alliance. Others see you as a symbol of the Queen's weakness, her willingness to elevate a primitive species to our level." Jake blocked her strike and countered, though she easily deflected his attempt. "And what do you see?" he asked. Kylara smiled slightly. "I see someone who saved my princess when I failed to protect her. That earns my respect regardless of your species." Not everyone shared her view. Lord Vexnor, the commander of the Imperial fleet, made his opinion clear during a state dinner. He was massive even by Velkara standards, his armor decorated with medals from countless campaigns. When introduced to Jake, he barely acknowledged him. "So this is the human," Vexnor said in heavily accented English, clearly preferring not to use the translation device. "Small, weak, soft." He looked at Queen Cirith. "And you would bind him to the royal house?" "I would," the Queen replied coolly. "He has proven his worth." "He proved he can use bandages," Vexnor scoffed. "That hardly qualifies him for the honor you bestow. Other houses will see this as favoritism to aliens, as weakness in the face of the unknown." Jake felt his face flush but kept quiet. He was a guest here, an outsider, and arguing would only prove Vexnor's point. Princess Liara, however, had no such restraint. "He saved my life when your vaunted fleet could not protect me from assassins. Perhaps you should focus on your own failures before judging others." The tension in the room became thick enough to cut. Vexnor's face darkened, and for a moment, Jake thought the commander might actually strike Liara. But the princess met his gaze without flinching, and eventually, Vexnor looked away. "Your Majesty," he said to the Queen, "I request permission to retire. I have lost my appetite." Queen Cirith nodded and Vexnor stormed from the hall. After he left, conversation gradually resumed, but Jake noticed many uncomfortable glances his direction. Later that night, Jake found Liara in one of the palace's meditation gardens. She sat on a bench of living crystal, staring at a fountain that flowed upward instead of down, the water defying gravity in loops and spirals. "Thank you for defending me," Jake said, sitting beside her. "I spoke only truth," Liara replied. "Vexnor is a great warrior but a poor politician. He sees change as weakness rather than evolution." "He's not wrong about me being an outsider," Jake said. "I am soft compared to your people. I am from a primitive species. Maybe this binding is a mistake." Liara turned to him, her luminous eyes serious. "Do you know why my mother truly wants you here, Jake?" "It is not just about alliance with Earth, though that matters. It is because our empire is dying." Jake blinked in surprise. "Dying? You're one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy." "Advanced, yes, but stagnant. We have not evolved significantly in 5,000 years. We have the same political structures, the same military doctrines, the same philosophies. We are comfortable in our power and blind to our own decline." She gestured at the impossible fountain. "We can make water flow upward, but we have forgotten how to see new directions." "And I'm supposed to change that?" Jake asked skeptically. "You already have," Liara said softly. "You made a decision in seconds that saved my life, using methods and tools we would have considered primitive. You are unpredictable, adaptable, and creative in ways we have forgotten. My mother hopes that binding you to us will remind us of these qualities." Jake thought about this as he watched the fountain. "No pressure, right?" Liara laughed, the sound like chimes in the wind. "Perhaps too much pressure, but you do not have to carry it alone. I will be with you." The way she said it made Jake look at her more carefully. Over the weeks they had grown close, but he had assumed it was friendship born of unusual circumstances. Now he wondered if there was more to it. "Liara," he began, but she held up a hand. "The binding ceremony is in 3 days," she said. "After that, many things will become clear. For now, focus on surviving the ritual without embarrassing yourself or me." The night before the ceremony, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about everything he was leaving behind, everything he was accepting. Earth felt impossibly far away, and while he could theoretically return to visit, he knew it would never truly be home again. He had made his choice, but that didn't make it easy. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Queen Cyrith, once again dressed simply and without her usual guard. "Your Majesty," Jake said, surprised. "Is everything all right?" "May I come in?" she asked. "There is something we must discuss before tomorrow." Jake stepped aside and the Queen entered his quarters. She moved to the balcony and he followed. The city glittered below them, peaceful and beautiful in the night. "I have not been entirely honest with you," the Queen began. "About the nature of the binding." Jake's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "The ceremony will do more than simply make you part of the royal household," she explained. "It will create a psychic bond between you and the royal family. Specifically between you, myself, and Liara. We will be able to sense each other's emotions, share thoughts if we choose, and know when the others are in danger." "That seems like a significant detail to mention now," Jake said, trying to keep his voice level. "I know," the Queen said, "and I apologize for the deception by omission. But I needed to be certain of your character before revealing this. Such a bond is intimate, permanent, and cannot be broken except by death. I could not risk creating it with someone whose mind might be hostile or dangerous." "And you're sure about me now?" Jake asked. Queen Cyrith turned to face him. "I am. I have watched you these past weeks, Jake Mitchell. I have seen how you treat those beneath you with respect, how you learn without arrogance, how you face challenges without complaint. You are honorable, compassionate, and strong in ways that have nothing to do with physical power. These are the qualities I want bonded to my family." Jake processed this information. A permanent psychic bond was far more than he had agreed to. It would mean giving up even the privacy of his own thoughts. "Can I refuse the bond but still stay?" "No," the Queen said simply. "The bond is what makes the binding meaningful. Without it, you would simply be a resident of the palace, honored but separate. The bond makes you family." "Family," Jake repeated. He thought about his own parents, long dead. He thought about the loneliness of his life before joining the Pathfinder. He thought about how Liara and even the intimidating Queen had made him feel welcome in ways he hadn't experienced in years. "What happens during the ceremony?" he asked. "You will be presented before the court," Queen Cyrith explained. "You will swear oaths of loyalty to the Empire and to the royal house. Then Liara and I will perform the bonding ritual. It will be painful as our minds adjust to the presence of a third, but the pain will pass. Afterward, you will be as much Velkara as human, at least in the eyes of our law and our people." "Will I still be me?" Jake asked quietly. The Queen smiled. "You will always be yourself, Jake. The bond does not change who you are. It simply adds connections you did not have before. You will feel what we feel, know what we think when we allow it, and we will know you in the same way. It requires trust, vulnerability, and courage." Jake looked out over the alien city that would become his home. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Good," the Queen said. "That means you understand the magnitude of what we are about to do. Fear is healthy. It keeps us careful." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "But I promise you, Jake Mitchell, you will not face this alone. From tomorrow forward, you will never be alone again." The next day arrived too quickly. Jake was dressed in his ceremonial armor, which had been adjusted to fit him perfectly. It was beautiful, a mix of human and Velkara design elements colored in deep blue and silver. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. Captain Helen came to see him before the ceremony. "You look good," she said, though her eyes were sad. "Very official." "I'm terrified," Jake confessed. "You should be," Helen replied. "What you're about to do is unprecedented. You're going to bond your mind to an alien queen and princess. That's either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and I honestly can't tell which." Jake laughed despite his nerves. "That makes two of us." Helen stepped forward and hugged him tightly. "Whatever happens, no." The weeks following the binding ceremony were strange for Jake. The psychic bond with Queen Cyrith and Princess Liara took time to adjust to. At first, their emotions crashed into his constantly, overwhelming him with feelings that weren't his own. The Queen's worry about political matters, Liara's joy during her studies, both of their concerns about various nobles. It was like living in a crowded room inside his own head. Liara taught him how to create mental barriers, how to shield his private thoughts while still maintaining the connection. It was exhausting work, like learning to use a muscle he never knew he had. But gradually Jake learned to control the bond, to reach out when he wanted contact and to maintain privacy when he needed it. His new position came with responsibilities. As a member of the royal household, he was expected to attend council meetings, state dinners, and various ceremonies. He struggled with the politics at first, unable to follow the complex web of alliances and rivalries that governed Velcara society. But the bond helped. When he was confused, he could sense Liara or the Queen's understanding, and they would guide him through their shared connection. Earth's government was thrilled with the arrangement. They sent ambassadors and trade delegations, all eager to establish formal relations with the Velcara Empire. Jake found himself acting as a liaison, translating not just language but culture between the two species. It was rewarding work, seeing humans and Velcara beginning to understand each other. But not everyone was happy with the changes. Lord Vexnor continued to oppose the alliance, speaking out against it in council meetings. Other conservative nobles joined him, forming a faction that viewed humans as a threat to Velcara purity and tradition. They couldn't directly challenge the Queen's decision to bind Jake to the family, but they could make their displeasure known. 2 months after the ceremony, Jake noticed something odd. He was reviewing security reports, a task the Queen had assigned him to give him insight into the Empire's military operations, when he spotted an anomaly. Several ships had been reassigned from their patrol routes without proper authorization. When he brought it up with Commander Kylara, she looked troubled. That should not be possible, she said, checking her own records. Those orders would need to come from Lord Vexnor himself, and they should have been reported to the Queen. But they weren't, Jake said, feeling a knot of worry in his stomach. Through the bond, he sensed Liara's attention focus on him, drawn by his concern. What is wrong? Her voice echoed in his mind. Possible security issue, Jake thought back. Ships being moved without proper authorization. He felt Liara's alarm spike, and then the Queen's consciousness joined them in the bond. Show me, Queen Cyrith commanded, and Jake shared the information he had found through their connection. It was strange passing data directly from mind to mind, but it was also incredibly efficient. The Queen's anger blazed through the bond. Summon Lord Vexnor immediately, she ordered aloud to the guards. And increase security around the palace. Something is wrong. Over the next few hours, Jake worked with Liara and a team of analysts to dig deeper into the military records. What they found was disturbing. Not only had ships been reassigned, but weapons had been moved, supplies rerouted, and personnel transferred without proper documentation. Someone was preparing for something, and they were trying to hide it. Lord Vexnor arrived at the palace in the evening, his face carefully neutral. Queen Cyrith received him in her private chambers, with Jake and Liara present. The commander bowed formally, but Jake could see the tension in his posture. You summoned me, Your Majesty, Vexnor asked. Explain these unauthorized troop movements, the Queen said, projecting the data on a holographic display. Ships, weapons, and personnel have been moved without my knowledge or approval. As fleet commander, you are responsible for such actions. Vexnor studied the display, his expression unreadable. Those movements were routine military exercises, Your Majesty. I did not think they required your personal approval. Routine exercises that you failed to report? Liara challenged. That violates standard protocol? Vexnor's eyes flickered to her, then to Jake. And Jake saw something in that look that made his skin crawl. There was hatred there and calculation. Perhaps I was negligent in my reporting, Vexnor said smoothly. I will ensure better documentation in the future. See that you do, Queen Cyrith said coldly. You are dismissed. After Vexnor left, Jake voiced his concern. He's lying. I could see it in his eyes. Those movements weren't routine. I agree, the Queen said through the bond, her mental voice tight with worry. But without proof of wrongdoing, I cannot act against him. He is too powerful, commands too much loyalty among the military. Moving against him without cause could trigger a civil war. Then we need to find proof, Liara said aloud. Over the following days, Jake threw himself into the investigation. He studied military doctrine, analyzed movement patterns, and compared current deployments with historical data. His human perspective proved valuable. He approached the problem differently than a Velcara would, asking questions that seemed obvious to him but had never occurred to his alien colleagues. Why move ships to this sector? He asked during one planning session, pointing at a star map. There's nothing there. No strategic value, no planets worth defending, no threats to guard against. Exactly, Commander Kylara said, leaning forward to study the map more carefully. Unless the threat is not external. Jake felt ice slide down his spine. You think they're positioning for an attack on the homeworld? The thought crossed my mind, Kylara admitted. But I dismissed it. No one would dare attack Velkara Prime. It is too well defended, and such an action would be suicide. Unless they had help from inside, Liara said quietly, her face pale. Unless someone with access to defense codes and protocols was coordinating the attack. They all looked at each other as the horrible realization sank in. Lord Vexnor wasn't just opposed to the changes Queen Cirith was making. He was planning to overthrow her. We need evidence, the Queen said through the bond, having been listening to their discussion. We need to catch him in the act or find documented proof of his plans. Until then, we appear paranoid and weak. Jake had an idea. I might know a way to get that evidence. But it involves breaking several of your laws and possibly getting me killed. Absolutely not, Liara said immediately. What are you thinking? The Queen asked, her mind focused on his. Vexnor hates me, Jake explained. He sees me as the symbol of everything wrong with your new policies. What if I gave him an opportunity to act against me? What if I made myself a target? That is incredibly stupid and dangerous, Commander Kylara said bluntly. It is also clever, the Queen admitted reluctantly. If Vexnor moves against you, he would have to involve his conspirators. We could trace the attack back to its source. I will not allow it, Liara said firmly, her emotions flooding the bond with fear and protectiveness. Jake is part of our family now. We do not use family as bait. Jake reached out through the bond, sharing his certainty and determination. This is why you wanted me here, remember? To think differently, to approach problems from new angles. Trust me on this. The argument continued for hours, but eventually Jake's plan was reluctantly approved. He would make himself vulnerable, travel outside the palace with minimal security, and essentially advertise himself as an easy target. Meanwhile, loyal forces would watch from a distance, ready to intervene and trace any attack back to its source. 3 days later, Jake visited one of the cultural centers in the city, ostensibly to learn more about Velkara art. He was accompanied only by 2 guards, far fewer than a member of the royal household would normally have. Through the bond, he felt Liara's constant worry and the Queen's tense alertness. The attack came in the market district, sudden and violent. A group of armed Velkara appeared from side streets, their armor unmarked, their weapons charged. Jake's guards moved to intercept, but they were outnumbered. Within seconds, one guard was down and Jake was running. He had trained for this. Commander Kylara had drilled him repeatedly on evasion tactics, and his human agility, while less than a Velkara's in raw power, gave him unpredictability. He dodged through market stalls, leaped over barriers, and used the crowd as cover. Jake! Liara's mental scream was agonizing through the bond. Where are you? Market district under attack. Jake thought back, trying to keep his panic from overwhelming her. Send help. He felt the Queen's consciousness expand through the bond, felt her issuing orders, felt backup forces begin to move. But they were minutes away and his attackers were seconds behind him. Jake ducked into an alley, his heart pounding. He had a small weapon, a concealable pistol Earth's security team had insisted he carry. But he was one human against trained Velkara warriors. His only advantages were surprise and creativity. When the first attacker rounded the corner, Jake was ready. He had rigged a market cart to collapse, and it crashed down in a shower of goods and debris. The Velkara stumbled, and Jake fired, his shot taking her in the shoulder. She went down, and Jake kept running. The chase continued through twisting streets. Jake's lungs burned, his legs ached, but he kept moving. He could feel Liara tracking him through. The trials of the conspirators took 3 weeks. Every day, Jake attended the proceedings, watching as Vexnor and his followers faced justice for their attempted coup. The evidence was overwhelming. The commander had spent years building his network of supporters, all united by their fear of change and their hatred of what they saw as the corruption of Velkara purity. During his testimony, Vexnor showed no remorse. He stood before the court and declared that he had acted to save the Empire from weakness, from the contamination of primitive species, from a queen who had lost sight of what made the Velkara great. Many in the court shifted uncomfortably, because while they condemned his methods, some secretly agreed with his sentiments. Jake sat in the gallery reserved for the royal family, feeling the weight of hostile stares. Even after helping stop the coup, Even after being bound to the royal family, he remained a symbol of division. Some saw him as a bridge builder. Others saw him as the reason their society was fracturing. Through the bond, he felt Liara's protective anger on his behalf, and the Queen's more calculated assessment of the political situation. They had survived an attempted overthrow, but the ideological conflict remained. The sentences were harsh. Vexnor was stripped of his rank and titles, his family disgraced, and he was exiled to a remote outpost where he would spend the rest of his long life in isolation. His closest co-conspirators received similar punishments. Lesser participants were demoted, reassigned, or placed under supervision. But punishment was only part of Queen Sirith's response. She used the coup attempt as a catalyst for broader reforms. She appointed new military leadership, promoted officers who had proven loyal during the crisis, and restructured the command hierarchy to prevent any single individual from accumulating too much power. Commander Kailara became the new fleet commander. The first time in centuries that position had been held by someone from outside the traditional military families. More controversially, the Queen formally opened diplomatic relations with Earth and invited human advisors to serve in the imperial government. The message was clear. The Velkara Empire would adapt or stagnate, and she had chosen adaptation. Jake found himself at the center of these changes, a living example of the Queen's vision for a more open and flexible society. Not everyone agreed with this direction. 3 of the noble houses formally protested, threatening to withdraw their support from the throne. The Queen met with them privately, and while Jake wasn't present for those conversations, he felt echoes of them through the bond. The Queen was negotiating, compromising, using every tool of politics and power to hold her empire together while pushing it toward change. "It is exhausting," she confessed to Jake one evening as they walked through the palace gardens. Liara walked with them, having recovered from her injuries, though she still moved carefully. "Every day brings new challenges, new opposition, new threats. I sometimes wonder if this change is worth the cost, is it?" Jake asked. The Queen stopped beside a fountain, watching the water flow in its impossible upward spiral. "Yes," she said finally, "because the alternative is slow death. I have lived 400 years, Jake. I have watched other civilizations rise and fall. Those who adapt survive. Those who cling to past glory fade away. I would rather the Velkara evolve than die. Some would say you are killing what made the Velkara great in the first place," Jake pointed out carefully. "And they may be right," the Queen admitted. "That is the risk of change. We may lose something precious in the transformation, but I believe what we gain will be worth it." Liara touched her mother's arm gently. "You are not alone in this, Mother. Jake and I are with you, as are many others who see the wisdom in your path." Through the bond, Jake felt the depth of the Queen's love for her daughter, her pride in how Liara had grown, and her hope for the future. It made him think about his own role in all of this. He had become more than just a symbol or a bridge builder. He had become part of a family, part of a vision for something larger than himself. Months passed. The political situation stabilized, though tensions remained. Human advisors arrived and began working with Velkara officials. Cultural exchanges increased. Earth and the Velkara Empire signed formal treaties covering trade, military cooperation, and shared scientific research. Jake split his time between diplomatic duties and continuing education about Velkara society. His relationship with Liara deepened during this time. They spent hours together, working on integration projects, discussing philosophy and politics, and simply enjoying each other's company. The bond between them made communication effortless, but it also created an intimacy that went beyond simple friendship. One evening, as they sat on Jake's balcony watching the city lights, Liara voiced what they had both been feeling. "I care for you, Jake, not just as family or fellow bonded. I care for you in ways that are complicated and not entirely proper." Jake turned to look at her, his heart racing. "I care for you too. But is this even possible? We are different species. There are cultural barriers, political complications. Your mother—" "My mother knows," Liara said with a slight smile. "The bond hides little from her. She has been watching our connection grow and she approves." "She does?" Jake asked, surprised. Through the bond, he felt the Queen's amused presence. "I do," her mental voice confirmed. "You are already family, Jake. If you and Liara wish to become something more, you have my blessing. Though I warn you, the court will have opinions about this." The court always has opinions, Liara said aloud, rolling her eyes. Let them talk. Over the following weeks, Jake and Liara's relationship became public knowledge. The reactions were mixed. Some saw it as romantic, the princess falling for the alien who saved her life. Others viewed it as inappropriate, further proof that human influence was corrupting traditional values. Jake tried to ignore the gossip and focus on his work and his relationship. Earth's response was enthusiastic. Human media celebrated the relationship as a symbol of interspecies cooperation. Jake received messages from old friends and family, along with plenty of attention he didn't want. He was offered book deals, movie rights, and speaking engagements. He declined them all, preferring to maintain some privacy despite his public role. A year after the coup attempt, Queen Cyrith called Jake to her private chambers. He found her standing at her window looking out over the city. She seemed tired, older than he had ever seen her, and through the bond he felt the weight of centuries pressing on her. "Your Majesty," he asked, "are you well?" "I am as well as I can be," she replied. "But I have been thinking about the future, about what comes after I am gone." Jake felt a chill. "You are not going anywhere." "I am 400 years old, Jake. For a Velkara, that is elderly. I have perhaps another century in me if I am fortunate, but one never knows." She turned to face him. "Liara will be queen one day. That much is certain. But she will need support, need someone who can provide perspective she lacks." "She will have advisors," Jake said. "She will have you," the queen corrected. "That is why I truly bound you to us, Jake. Not just to build bridges with Earth, though that matters. Not just to introduce new perspectives, though that is valuable. I bound you to us so that when I am gone, Liara will have someone she trusts absolutely, someone bonded to her by mind and heart." Jake understood what she was saying. "You want me to help her rule. I want you to be her partner in all things," Queen Cyrith said. "The bond will last as long as you both live. Use it to support each other, to provide balance. She has the wisdom of our people. You have the adaptability of yours. Together you can lead the empire through the changes to come." "That is a lot of responsibility," Jake said quietly. The queen smiled. "You saved Liara's life without hesitation when you had no reason to help her. You accepted the binding knowing it meant giving up your old life. You fought to protect us during the coup. You have already accepted responsibility greater than most could bear. This is simply the continuation of your journey." Through the bond, Jake felt her confidence in him, her genuine belief that he could do what she asked. It was humbling and terrifying in equal measure. The years that followed brought continued change. The Velkara Empire and Earth developed closer ties, trading technology and culture. Human settlements appeared on Velkara worlds, while Velkara established embassies on Earth. The process wasn't always smooth. There were conflicts, misunderstandings, and setbacks, but slowly, steadily, the two species learned to work together. Jake became a respected figure in both societies. He was Earth's most successful diplomat and the Velkara Empire's most visible advocate for reform. He worked tirelessly to build understanding, to translate not just words but worldviews between species. It was exhausting work, but it was also deeply fulfilling. His relationship with Liara continued to grow. They formally partnered according to Velkara customs, a ceremony that was broadcast across both their worlds. It was strange standing before billions of humans in Velkara, declaring his love for an alien princess. But looking into Liara's eyes, feeling her joy through the bond, Jake knew it was right. 5 years after he first saved Liara's life, Jake stood on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The city stretched out below, more diverse now than when he first arrived. Humans walked the streets,